folks, welcome to the very first episode of Generation Toon, presented by the Space Monkey X Audio Workshop. This is your host, Rob Lamley. Here on Generation Toon, I, a Gen Xer, will be joined by my wife, Andrea, a Millennial, and our Gen Z daughter, Harper, to watch some of our favorite cartoons spanning the last 40 years. We'll look at how cartoons have changed from formulaic Saturday morning entertainment made strictly for children to now offering up some of the most mature and introspective shows in media today. Our plan is to have the podcast go in cycles of 3 episodes, with each co-host presenting a cartoon from their generation, starting with the 80s, then the 90s, and finally the 2000s, before rewinding back to the 80s again. We'll sit down and watch a handful of episodes to get a good taste for the cartoon, and then we'll talk about what makes it great, not so great, and whether or not we'd watch more of it in the future. Because this is our first episode, we'll be starting our first cycle with my choice, an influential cartoon from when I was a kid, Thundarr the Barbarian, produced by Ruby Spears Animation. Thundarr was released by ABC in 1980 and aired for 2 seasons for a total of 21 episodes on Saturday mornings. It was picked up again and put into reruns by NBC in 1983 before leaving the Saturday morning airwaves forever. Thundarr featured 3 main characters, Thundarr the Barbarian, Ariel the Sorceress, and their hairy, growling sidekick, Ukla the Mock. The premise of these adventures in a barren post-apocalyptic wasteland was laid out in the show's animated opening monologue.
Thundarr the Barbarian. The year 1994. From out of space comes a runaway planet, hurtling between the Earth and the Moon, unleashing cosmic destruction. Man's civilization is cast in ruin. 2,000 years later, Earth is reborn. A strange new world rises from the old. A world of savagery, super science, and sorcery. But one man bursts his bonds to fight for justice. With his companions, Ukla the Mock and Princess Ariel, he pits his strength, his courage, and his fabulous sun's sword against the forces of evil. He is Thundarr the Barbarian.
Now tell me, what kid wouldn't want to watch that? For this show, Andrea, Harper, and I watched 3 episodes of Thundarr. Season 1, Episode 1, Secret of the Black Pearl, where Thundarr and company must take a powerful black pearl to the ancient city of Manhat to protect its people from the evil two-faced wizard Gemini and his Ratmen minions. Season 1, Episode 6, Attack of the Amazon Women, sees Thundarr help the amphibious Amazon warriors against a half-human, half-shark enemy. And Season 2, Episode 5, Last Train to Doomsday, Thundarr helps Tai, a young woman who runs a train transporting people and cargo through the wasteland, as she battles hawkmen and a mysterious mummy named Janice. And now on to our discussion about Thundarr the Barbarian. We are here today to talk about the first cartoon that I wanted to bring up, which was called Thundarr the Barbarian.
Lothar of the Hill People.
I know. Now, when I was a kid, this was one of the first cartoons that I really fell in love with. I think what really drew me to it was it felt very Star Warsy, and I think that was kind of an obvious influence with the Sun Sword and everything like that, and the big Ukla the Mock.
Thank you.
The Chewbacca wannabe.
You mean the guy who's the big hairy dude that speaks in grunts?
Yes. So I was instantly drawn to it because it was everything that Star Wars was to some extent. But as I got older and watched it in reruns, I realized it was a post-apocalyptic Earth, and that was something that had never occurred to me when I was 5 in 1980. But when I was 8 in 1983, it was kind of like, oh, wow, that's pretty dark.
What happened those 3 years that all of a sudden you started to realize
it was the
post-apocalyptic could be a thing?
I didn't know post-apocalyptic.
The dark 3 years of my childhood.
It was in between Star Wars movies.
I'm sorry, but when I was 8 years old, that's when I realized how dark Steven Universe was, and Gravity Falls, and all the other cartoons I'm going to be talking about later on in the series.
I think it's just
that was around the time where I started realizing, oh, wait a minute, these people are traumatized.
Okay, I waited till much later in life to experience trauma and growth like that, so I'm sorry that
Late bloomer.
Yeah.
Sheltered.
Also,
sheltered
what
suburban
happened?
life.
What did we do wrong?
Or right.
Hey, guess what? Now I'm comedic, and I have a sense of humor.
There you go.
So anyway, by the time I was watching the reruns, it occurred to me that this was a former, version of Earth 2,000 years in the future after disaster had set in, and that was mind-boggling to me at the time. And you want to laugh, but what is Adventure Time?
In a world where everyone is dying.
A fever dream?
So it was very similar to me. It kind of hit me that, wow, the world could end. And that was something that had never really occurred to me until I was 8.
So much has been explained.
Adventure Time also it got a little too realistic, because it said that all the humans died out because of a giant virus that no one could stop.
That's a common trope too, to wipe out a population.
Yeah, but from what's happened this past year, I think that's a little scary.
With Thundar, it was basically climate change. Granted, there was a meteor that caused the climate change.
It was also in 1995.
Well, 1994, but yes.
Ow. Ow.
But, that was far flung in the future in 1980, so...
I mean, we watched Back to the Future, the second part of Back to the Future, where they where they think 2015.
Anyway.
So anyway,
it was my first time seeing it when you showed it to us.
I'm not surprised
because I was 3.
Yeah. Well,
when you were watching it.
No, you were not even born yet when I was watching it. It came out in 1980. It was in reruns.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking about when you were older and grizzled and had lived those 3 years that I forgot.
Yes.
I was born in those years.
8.
I was born during your trauma years.
Yes.
That was the first time you ever dropped an ice cream on the sidewalk. That was when it all changed.
All downhill.
Hello, darkness.
So yes, the show debuted in 1980 and ran until 1981 with only 21 episodes. So it was only 2 seasons. It's not like it was this huge, drawn-out thing. It's not The Simpsons or anything. But that was not uncommon for Saturday morning cartoon shows either.
No, they were flash in a pan.
Yeah,
here and gone.
Quick money. Kids are sick of it. They've moved on.
Yes.
So
this is not selling toys.
No. That's true. And there was very little merchandising for this show, too. It's not like Scooby-Doo where you could buy everything Thundar. There was basically a board game, a coloring book. There was an Ookla the Mock Halloween costume, which I have a picture of. It's really, it's kind of awesome.
Really?
It's terrifying.
And
I want to wear it this year.
You do. I'm gonna leave the house. I'm just gonna.
So I mean, it's not like this. Cartoons just weren't the same thing as they were later in the 80s. So it's not surprising that you never saw it. The only time it was ever in reruns was when it moved to NBC in 1983, and they only purchased it for reruns specifically. They didn't create any new content.
Right.
It was all just, hey, kids liked this, let's do it again. So it doesn't surprise me at all that you've never heard of it. Obviously, I'm not surprised you've never heard of it, Harper, because there's so many things that we have to explain to you as it is.
Yeah.
But some obscure show from 1980, that doesn't surprise me at all.
You guys have taught me a lot about your childhoods and what you guys grew up with.
And you've grown up with some of that too. You've watched some of the cartoons we used to watch. You've watched Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Or you've watched the newer iteration of the things that we grew up with.
And that, and also there would be a few references in cartoons that I would watch that you guys would be like, oh, I remember that. That was from a cartoon or from a TV show that I used to watch, and something like that.
It got really bad when we started watching Animaniacs with you.
Oh yeah.
And every 10 seconds we had to pause.
Pause it.
Okay. Madonna was so-and-so.
Try watching. We didn't get through an entire episode of Whose Line.
Yeah,
because I was just like, okay, a cassette tape is a...
I knew what a cassette tape.
Okay, a landline. Phyllis Diller was.
Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah, I enjoyed watching it, as hokey as it is.
Yeah.
But it has a quaint, dated style to it. That being a child who did grow up in the 80s, I appreciated that. The reuse of the backgrounds and foreground as they're running, and the style of it I like.
And there's a lot of action where the person is paused and only their head or their mouth is moving only.
Yes.
You know, a lot of that really cheap animation tactics, for sure.
It was definitely interesting to see because, like, of what I've grown up with, it's very different because around that time, the main goal of cartoons, or a few cartoons, at least most of the main ones, were to sell toys. And so it was pretty much cheaply made, and it was pretty, and if you look back on it, it was just like,
whereas
hilarious.
Your cartoons were made to fill a hot topic.
That's true.
Yours were made to sell t-shirts.
Now, in fact, at this time in 1980, they were not made to sell toys. It's a little bit later, when the rules changed for television, that they could start making cartoons that sold toys. So
you could have a whole commercial
split
that was entertaining.
Yeah.
Split up by smaller chunks of commercials.
Yes.
To sell your parents things.
Yes.
But
so
also you.
We'll get to those. Don't get me wrong, because I grew up in the 80s, and that's when it just exploded. For those of you at home, we are sitting amongst vintage toys and memorabilia. Yes. So we will get to that. We will get to that age, but at this time, it was purely children's entertainment. Now they were selling advertising for children in between, the commercial breaks. But at this time, it was purely, what can we get the kids to sit in front of the television for 6 or 7 hours on a Saturday and watch, and then we'll show them ads in between.
It definitely does
mainline Cocoa Puffs.
Oh man, yeah.
It definitely, although like around that time it wasn't like made to sell toys, it definitely did have that slight feeling of like you would want like if I was a kid, like if I was a little kid watching this, I might want a action figure of that character because they look so because they look so powerful and like. Yeah. Just
because you want to play Apocalypse at Home.
Just wait a few more years.
Yes.
But of course, I mean, that's what little kids like.
Yeah.
They like adventure. They like those kind of stories.
Well,
so
I guess Harper will get this more than we understand this with her more than with Dash. But you also grew up where you'd make your toys like play with each other and stuff like that. And but that's all you did in the 80s with your toys. So you could watch something on television, then you're going to go reenact it with your toys, and you're going to play out the thing like you wanted to see it play it out.
Because there's really not television made for you for the rest of the week. It was Saturday
or even the
mornings
rest of the
nothing.
day. Yeah, like noon hit.
Yeah.
And it was
for us it was 11, and that's when the news segment came on that told us all about the farm markets for the day. That's when I knew my Saturday morning was done. Was when they started talking about grain and corn prices. I grew up in the country.
Right, but I'm just thinking about what a great metaphor this is for you just growing up.
Yeah.
You spent 6 or 7 hours with toys, and then all of a sudden it was...
Bam. It was...
Smack you in the face, get up, walk beans.
Yep, yeah. I mean, it was... And then that would be it for the week. You'd be lucky to watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or Sesame Street, and that wasn't nearly as exciting as Thundarr the Barbian.
Well, and even that, you have to keep in mind at that time, would only be on from like 1 to 3 maybe, and you had to, and it was only on like your local...
PBS?
Yeah, your local PBS, if you caught it. Otherwise, you're looking at a woman sponge painting or a guy cooking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was the only time television was made for us.
One of the main differences that I've seen, at least from clips that I've seen of a few 80s cartoons, are ones with ones with that sort of style where basically the men are really buff, the women are really attractive, and like this, it's more marketed. Like, and
the sidekicks are very hairy.
Is that like that style, the characters, like they would, I kind of recognize that they use the same body type for all the women and like most of the same body type for the men. Yeah. So, and it definitely does show that like then they would reuse assets and body and like characters in different scenes, when now like you look at a like a giant crowd of cartoon characters from the same cartoon. There's different types. There's a certain style to it that fits together.
For sure.
There's like different heights of different people. There's different like nose shapes. There's different features, and it definitely does show the growth of cartoons, not only because of like style wise, and also just how society has progressed. Because I don't know if you noticed, but there was a lot of pale people.
Yes. Thundar was very, very white.
Very white. When you look at when you look at cartoons now, there's more people of color.
Of course.
There's different cultures being represented. So that definitely does show not only stylized.
Yes, it does show society, because not only it's a cartoon, so you don't just have to stick within the realm of flesh tones that exist on Earth.
Yeah,
people can be purple and blue and and even in Thundar, none of it.
Yeah, no, very white.
Very, very white.
But you know what? That was the culture of the time too. Most entertainment was made for white people. I mean, unfortunately, that's just how it was. I mean, if you look at movies from that same time period, it's mostly white people. Mostly white men, too.
Mostly mainstream movies, because I'm sure they exist.
Well, of course.
But yes, they didn't get the traction, the advertising, the everything.
Right.
That,
There was also, because of how it's, again, this is a really good way to show how society and how cartoons and media have progressed, because back then it was mostly marketed towards white people, and so there would be a bunch of white people in your Saturday cartoons. When now you look at cartoons and there is a black person main character, there are maybe even some Muslim representation. There's a bunch of different representation of people of all different races and all different cultures, and it's not just marketed towards white. It's not just marketed towards white people. It's marketed towards all people, and
of course,
of all different races and all different
cultures,
and as it should be.
Yeah,
and that's a really good way to see how our society has progressed and how our media has progressed. One of the cartoons I'm going to be talking about in the future definitely has a lot of good representation, and it's good to see that representation show from where it was back then.
Sure.
Well, we can say back then, but this is really picked up steam in the past 15 years.
Yeah, if not even less time than that.
Yeah. I mean, you're fortunate just to be of the age that's what you're growing up with, and that's probably.
I mean, even the cartoons that we're going to get to in Mom's era, very white.
Yeah. Very
few people of color, very few people of other religions are even going to be mentioned. Yeah. It's very white still. Now there are some bright spots.
I just realized that most of the cartoons that I probably watched as a child did not feature humans.
Well, I mean, that's actually one way to get around what we're talking about.
Or the humans would be side characters. But I know you're.
But that's one way to get around what we're talking about. You don't have to worry about if it's a white or a black character, if it's a duck.
But
you know what I'm saying?
But there's of course
there's coding.
There's coding, of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
And definitely different types of coding.
Right.
But as you mentioned, it's mostly either the human's the sidekick or there's no humans at all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I was really proud with what I've grown up with because of the cartoons that I grew up with, because of seeing how Thundar was very white, very same more society's view of a perfect man and a perfect woman.
Sure.
While now I'm growing up with characters who are a bit bigger, just in build. Some characters who are POC, characters who have different religions, all this different stuff. So I'm pretty proud of what I grew up with, and I'm very happy with what I did grow up with.
And I'm glad it's progressed that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, one thing I wanted to mention about Thundar is that it had a very impressive cast behind the scenes. First of all, the creative team behind it included Alex Toth. Alex Toth designed the three main characters, Ariel, Ukla, and Thundar. He was responsible for the character designs for Super Friends, Space Ghost, not Coast to Coast, the original.
No, but as I'm looking at your list here, it makes sense why there was a kind of a comforting affinity for this style.
Oh, yeah.
Because much like Harper watched reboots of stuff that we watched, I'm looking to continue your list. You've got Space Ghost, C-Lab 2020, The Herculoids, and Harvey Birdman. And I watched,
right.
Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, and
C-Lab
2021. Yeah. So that it makes sense now seeing that and me going, there's just something I like about the way the style is.
Yeah.
It's because I love those.
And I mean, that was very iconic for the time. I mean, again, they wouldn't have remade those shows, quote unquote, if they weren't a touchstone for people our age.
Well, and it even continues in where you've got Venture Brothers that was a mimic of that style, and bringing in some of those styles and characters too.
So aside from Alex Toth, there was also a little guy named Jack the King Kirby.
Who? Never heard of him.
Jack Kirby was responsible basically for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He and Stan Lee in the 1960s created the Incredible Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Black Panther, Silver Surfer. I mean, he brought back Captain America from World War II obscurity. If it were not for Jack Kirby, there would be no Marvel today.
Isn't there even, they've named an award after him, right? A Jack Kirby award that comics can get?
It would not surprise me whatsoever. Okay. But, I mean, so he did all of the side characters. He did a lot of the environments, which, now that I know that, really makes a lot of sense. Kirby was especially known for drawing technology and machines. He would do 2 cover spreads of nothing but like a giant computer that had all these intricate
and then you'd have
details.
Your character just small in the middle,
and then your character would
where it's almost secondary to
that. Yeah, he was really well known for that. And looking back at it now that now that I know that, looking back on the couple episodes we watched, it makes a lot of sense that it was Kirby. Now, I did read that they had to dumb down his designs because it's animation and they can't afford to be that detailed.
Right.
But it was really interesting to hear that and knowing that that is where the influence comes from, and it makes total sense now that I see it. The story editor for the show was Steve Gerber. He is best known for creating Howard the Duck. Which, you kind of laugh now because we know is the...
We know the 80s movie.
The 80s movie. Featuring a duck human love scene. Which is weird.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah,
And Harper, I saw that movie for the first time younger than you. Maybe I didn't have 3 dark years between 5 and 8 because all of them were dark. Maybe that's the answer to this riddle.
Hold on, how old were you?
I don't recall. I do know that that's one of those movies that, I watched it, didn't fully get it.
It would have come out in about 1984, 85, give or take, so...
I probably saw it in video 86, 87.
Yeah. So you would have been 4 or 5, maybe.
No.
Yeah.
Oh. No. So then I would have seen it in 88, 89.
Okay. Still. It's a weird movie. I totally recommend you watch it just to be... what the heck is going on right now?
just to judge Mom's childhood.
Well, no, it's more my childhood.
Oh, no. Just that I was young when I watched it.
But anyway, Howard the Duck was actually kind of a big deal in the 70s and early 80s. He was kind of like, almost like a counterculture type character. So he was
not a mainstream duck.
No. But the other thing Gerber did was he brought back Guardians of the Galaxy. It had gone out of print in the 60s. So once again, were it not for Steve Gerber, we probably wouldn't have an MCU today. Now, his Guardians of the Galaxy was a different lineup than the one we know today, but he brought it back, and it kept going basically since then. So if it were not for him, we wouldn't have the movies today. So
our Missouri superhero, the only hero we ever will get in this state.
So again, another high-quality person behind the show. Another was Buzz Dixon. He went on... He actually kind of got to start writing for Thundar and some of the earlier cartoons from Ruby Spears. But he went on to write Transformers, G.I. Joe. He did just about every big cartoon in the 80s. Dungeons & Dragons, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Tiny Toons. He did everything. So he got to start there too. So obviously another, pretty decent person. Another writer was Mark Evanier. Now, he started in live action. He wrote for Welcome Back, Kotter, which is a show you've never heard of, Harper. The Love Boat, which is another show.
Heard of that one?
No.
Okay. I could see just the Love Boat being a phrase thrown around in a throwaway reference.
Right.
I mean, I've heard the phrase basically the word love boat.
The love boat.
Around.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
But not knowing exactly
but not knowing what it
means.
is. That's what I figured.
It's okay. You don't need to.
Now, as we get it, it's weirdly referenced a lot in 90s cartoons now that I'm thinking about it.
Because kids were still watching it back then, and then...
Or their parents were watching reruns. Yeah, I guess it's true.
Okay, so anyway, Mark went on to work on Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, Plastic Man, Dungeons & Dragons, and he was the head writer for one of Mom's favorite cartoons, Garfield and Friends.
That tells me that his sense of humor is probably a little twisted. Because that show had its moments really.
Yeah. But, that was, not to go too far off the path here, but that was just kind of getting started with that era of, hey, we can throw in some adult era, more adult jokes.
Well, I think it was I think what made the leap is probably going from things like Peanut specials, which was a once in a while thing, and put in what's the specials? Garfield specials, where they'd have stuff like that, and then
since those were in prime time, they tried to make it a little bit more entertaining for everyone.
Correct, but then they were like, well, maybe we put those on the kid stuff too.
So anyway, there's a great team behind Thundar, much more impressive than most cartoons had at the time. The other thing I kind of wanted to mention was that, surprisingly enough, it's actually considered a lot more violent than other cartoons at the time. The important thing to think about there is reference Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo, there's always the white guy in the mask.
Yeah.
Right?
They've been doing that for years and it still works.
Yes. But the thing is, the white guy in the mask never hurts anyone. He's never even really threatening anyone. He's just there going, booga, wooga, wooga. He's just scaring
he's got a
people.
master plan that's going to bring down the economic structure for the town.
Right.
But he is thwarted before that.
But he's never hurting anyone. He's never attacking anyone. Thundar, in the 3 episodes we watched, people are being attacked. That old guy in the beginning with the black pearls being attacked by the rat men. You've got the Amazon women who are literally shooting at each other. And then in the 3rd one we watched, they're attacking that train that has a bunch of civilians on it.
Also, there was acid. They were they were being threatened with acid.
So these things didn't happen on other cartoons.
I remember her it looked like shooting sand out of her hands.
Well, sand, acid, rock, paper, scissors.
Is this the original of Pocket Sand from King of the Hill?
But it was a much more violent television show than all the other shows on at the time. I know it seems quaint by today's standards, but
definitely.
But the other thing you have to consider is that it was on broadcast television, not on cable or on streaming, and they have very different rules even today for broadcast television. So, I actually went and found an article with Steve Gerber. He did an interview for Fantastic Magazine in 1980, and he says this about standards and practices. Now, standards and practices are the people who control. They're basically the censors. Okay, He had this to say. Quote, "We have a number of severe limitations with all of the mayhem that goes on in our show. The program practices will still not allow our main character to throw a punch or to hit anybody. He can do all kinds of acrobatic things, but he can't even trip anyone." He goes on to say that anything that could be emulated by children, he couldn't do in the show. So, Thundar could pick up a boulder and throw it and knock into a rat man because a little kid couldn't do that. But he can't even shove a rat man because a kid could shove a person. What?
In my cartoons, I've seen people get decapitated by the main characters. How?
Again, 1980 broadcast television made for children, not for, adolescents or adults. So it's just a very different time. And that is because of the censorship, they couldn't have weapons, really. You couldn't have anything with a blade. So the Barbarian, Conan the Barbarian always had this big nasty sword, and Conan is obviously the inspiration for Thundar. He couldn't have a sword or an axe that had a blade, because again, that could be emulated by children. That's how they came up with the sun sword. Oh. Because it was a sword made of lightning, and that is obviously not something that children can possess.
And it's something that once he's done using it, it disappears. So there's not even a blade. There's just a handle on his wrist.
It's not a constant reminder that he has a weapon. So it was very restricted at the time, and so all things considered, it was kind of what's the right word? It's kind of subversive that they were able to do as much as they did.
That still definitely shows the difference of cartoons, because I've seen characters get impaled, decapitated, just straight up kill someone. Like, it's just it's just very violent. And there's at least like one episode, or maybe even more, where there's a little bit of blood. So I know that there's definitely a difference there.
Well, and then if you, I mean, it's not even that many more years in the 80s. You get Ninja Turtles who are carrying blades at all times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, that's in America.
Oh, fair.
In the UK, they couldn't carry their weapons. In fact, they couldn't even say they were ninjas. Anyway,
and
totally off topic.
Also off topic, would it be a safe assumption that the age that Thundar came out and that you couldn't show these things on television, the men who would go on to be on Jackass probably were watching the same thing, and we'll call that a rebellion? Like, for
sure, yeah.
Couldn't show this? Well, one of the running themes that I picked up on watching these was that it was a whole lot of, at least a couple episodes we watched, a whole lot of doubting the women.
Yeah.
And then having them come back and, like, take care of it. It was very much Thundar, like, no, I've got it. But it was also that same...
But Ariel usually ended up...
Right, but it was also in that same 80s way of, like... Men, I have to come do all the work, and then you go back to being a dainty lady with dainty lady brain.
Yes.
Of course, like, you could still have a strong female protagonist without them, like, being always annoyed at the men and, like, something like that.
You can, but in this time, no, you couldn't.
Right.
The closest we get in the 80s is probably, would you say Janine or April? Janine from Ghostbusters is fed up with everyone.
Yeah.
And then April is kind of helpless too.
Yeah. April was constantly getting kidnapped by the Foot.
I want you to say that sentence again slower for me.
I mean, you're right. I really can't think of
There's
too
also
many.
a lot of times where Ariel would, like, her powers would not work for a little bit, so they could still show a scene of Thundar being a hero before the woman gets too powerful.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, yeah.
Like, I remember one of the scenes, like, I don't know what happened. I think it was in the episode with the Amazon women, but her wrists, like, she was, like, using her magic, and her wrists got bound.
And then she couldn't do her
she
magic
said, "Oh no, my wrists are bound. How am I going to release my magic?" First of all, I was so close to saying "tile of your sex tape." Second of all,
I am appalled and proud in this moment.
Great.
Oh.
Now I gotta cut that out so DFS doesn't come after this.
Wrong. It just means she watches Brooklyn Nine-Nine. We all know what it means. I'm proud of her. I'm a little proud.
Second of all, it was very obvious that they only did that just so Thundar could be a hero.
Yes. So he could rescue her.
And he could rescue her before
I can't do jazz hands with my wrists bound.
Exactly. So he comes in with his phallic sun sword.
The sun sword.
Literal big dick energy.
And it expands and contracts.
Right.
Oh,
and his wrist is stronger for it.
I can't use any of this.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. Just, how about this? Use the excuse that I was brought into the internet at a very early age. But yeah, like, that was just a weird...
This series is just going to be us picking out how dumb and phallic a lot of these cartoons are.
Well, they were made for mostly young boys, so that makes sense.
So that is
Welcome to Saturday morning BDE.
And also, like, that would also happen, and also, like, at least, like, she would do something really powerful, and then as soon as that's done, like, at the very end of the episode or something, like, Thundar would just take back control in a very quick and easy way, where it's obvious that, like, they're pushing her aside and still making him, like, this should be the hero you should have been rooting for the entire time.
This is why, when you get into the workforce in a few years, you always make friends with the secretaries, because they're the ones really running things.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to insert real quick about the violence and stuff. the Sun Sword could not cut anyone. You notice that in the 3 episodes we watched, I almost said Conan, Thundar would cut through ropes, he would cut through bars on a cage, so he couldn't actually use his weapon against anyone. But he could cut objects. Again, no violence towards people that could be emulated.
So we're back to again him being a false hero, and just because he is a big strong white man, he is still seen as the hero, even though the girl is able to use magic. She was able to save the Amazon. She was able to do a bunch of things.
But that all comes down to what kids can emulate. Most kids can't shoot magic rays out of their hands, whether they're tied up or not.
But they can throw sand.
Yes.
That's one thing, too. They just...
But at the same time, they couldn't show real-looking guns. That's why when the rat men are chasing after them on the bikes, they're holding up clubs and it's shooting out lasers.
Yes, I forgot about that.
I was thinking that was the weirdest thing.
Why was everything shooting out lasers?
Because they can't shoot bullets, because that's could be emulated.
True.
Lasers, most kids, again, don't have a laser gun.
Most?
It was the 80s, you never know.
What were you farm kids up to?
But actually, that's a good thing to mention, because you're going to see that a lot in the cartoons that I grew up with. G.I. Joe, red and blue lasers. Brave Star, lasers. Every cartoon was lasers.
But that was also the 80s, though.
Yes.
True.
Lasers were a big part of our decor and school photos.
And there's something you can actually draw. I mean, how are you going to draw a bullet? You know what I'm saying?
Well...
I mean, you can show the aftermath of the bullet, but here you could actually see the lasers going back and forth, and, and so it's a visual thing too. But more importantly, and on this show at least, they couldn't show actual guns or anything that even resembled a real gun.
Right.
That's why the rat
laser clubs.
Yeah, that's why the rat men have their club.
The new Ratman Laser Club, name of my new jam band.
I love it.
You guys want to head on down to Ratman Laser Club?
It's ladies' night.
No.
Okay. So Thundar, like I said, it only ran for 21 episodes. It ended in 1981. It did get picked up again in 1983 by NBC purely for rerun reasons. But it was canceled in 1981 for the oddest reason ever.
And that would be?
Laverne and Shirley. Gary Marshall. You may know Gary Marshall.
Not personally, but I'm aware of who he is.
Okay. You have no idea who Gary Marshall is.
Yeah, no.
Gary Marshall was a TV producer in the 1970s and 80s. And
everything he touched was gold.
And that is exactly why Thundar got canceled. Because Gary Marshall wanted to make cartoons of his popular television shows. He wanted to make a Happy Days cartoon.
I forgot those were a thing.
He wanted to make Laverne and Shirley cartoons. And he made your personal favorite, Mork and Mindy cartoons.
Yes.
Those were all three of his biggest shows on primetime, and he wanted to make them into cartoons to expand the audience into children. So, in about 1980, he decided to force them to make the Fonz and the Happy Days gang. Which I know none of this makes any sense to you.
I'm just gonna nod and smile. Pretend I know.
The Fonz and the Happy Day gangs. Happy Day. Why am I having such a hard time with that? The Fonz and the Happy Day. The Fonz and the Happy Days gang was a cartoon that premiered, and then he wanted to expand that with Laverne and Shirley in the Army, which they were never in the Army. They worked at a bottling. A brewery, in Milwaukee. So why the Army seemed like a good idea, I have no idea. But because he wanted that show, and ABC did whatever Gary Marshall wanted, they had to find a slot for Laverne and Shirley in the Army. And so they kicked off Thundar, and put in...
Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather.
So they kicked out Thundar and put in Laverne and Shirley. And then there was another show, which I'm not quite sure what it was yet. I haven't done the research on that. But then the next year they came out with Mork and Mindy, which booted another popular Saturday morning cartoon. Now, according to everything I've read, the ratings on Thundar were great. Like, there was no reason to cancel it as far as ratings go. It's not like they were looking for the lowest hanging fruit and got rid of it. It was actually a really good show. People loved it. After it was canceled, the producers got like tons of fan mail saying, why did they cancel your show? Apparently even people from like Yale and MIT and like Ivy
Indoor
League
kids.
schools. Well, yes, but Ivy League schools were writing in, and entire classes of kids in elementary schools were writing in and saying, "Why did they cancel our show?" But there's nothing they could do about it because Gary Marshall ruled all. So the show got canceled.
Powerful.
It got brought back for just 1983, but then it pretty much went away. So yes, that was Thundar. I think we've covered just about everything we could on Thundar that,
I feel
We
like
have beaten this dead horse with our laser clubs.
Yes.
and also like it's just this cartoon definitely was a good place to start to get into what we're going to see.
Barlow.
I think that, No. I think she's onto something though, because I do feel like it encompasses a lot of different things. It encompasses the very white, very
cocaine fueled 80s.
yes, very white, very masculine dominated shows. But it also shows, where the censorship was at the time and where cartoons were as far as violence and themes and stories that they could handle. I mean, it's a very good start to see where we were beginning for this show.
It also definitely gives us a few things to look at whenever we are watching the rest of it.
I think you're right.
Because
then we can start to maybe see the progression.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, it's not all white people on Rugrats. I actually don't know. I've never seen a single episode of Rugrats. I'll be interested to get to that one.
Hey, look, he was actually able to hit a guy in the
Right.
face.
Yes.
Also Rugrats.
And that first decapitation on Rugrats, whew, that was a controversy.
It was Sweep.
Don't worry, it's a cartoon. The character's just gonna live, and no one's gonna talk about it.
Right? It's like Kenny from South Park, which is probably a reference you don't understand either.
Actually, I do because of TikTok.
Oh,
People
okay.
on TikTok mention that.
So I think it is a good place to start because it's very much the base for what my generation's cartoons.
It's definitely
would
what I thought of when I thought of cartoons from when you were younger. It was definitely my expectations were definitely met with that cartoon. like buff guy, thin girl, weird animal sidekick.
What more do you need?
A bunch of white people. Let's not listen to the
Rat
lady.
people. Yeah.
Right.
Let's not listen to the lady.
Okay, so that was Thundarr the Barbarian. Harper, as a Generation Z, is that what we decided you are? As a Gen Z,
Babies and Gen
would
Z.
you want to watch more of Thundarr the Barbarian?
No, but I mean, I'm sure the writing would have gotten better if we watched.
No, it wouldn't.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't.
It was 1980.
Okay.
the formula wasn't going to change.
I was just being hopeful.
No.
Essentially, I feel like it had its time.
It's
continue.
very of the time.
I also just feel like it should have. I also really hope that there isn't a Thundar reboot.
Actually, I think a Thundar reboot would be awesome
Well,
because it would incorporate all the things that we've been talking about.
That is true.
That could change over time. I mean, I think it would be amazing, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, no.
Okay, Andrea, as a millennial, would you care to watch more?
No.
All right, right out the gate.
No.
No,
No.
just not your thing.
Well,
or...
I take that back. I would totally sit down and MST3K it for
understandable
for funsies.
Or see a Thundar 20 C-Lab type reboot.
Yes.
Where it's tongue in cheek and
that would be amazing.
I could definitely.
But no.
Fair enough.
The one thing about Thundar that I did like was how it took
Ended. No, sorry.
how it kind of had almost like the Earth kind of was reborn in that world after everything has ended. Thundar basically didn't know much about how we saw our the modern world that we live in. So it was fun. It was
the modern
fun.
world of 1994.
Just the world.
That's the future.
He's just a caveman. He doesn't understand our modern.
He basically it was good to see that, and it was a good reminder of oh yeah, the world has ended at this point, but there are still, and that's why he doesn't know much about this.
One thing. one thing I forgot to mention, and this was never mentioned on the show, and this is also something I should have mentioned this earlier, that made Thundar a little bit more unusual than the other shows on at the time. This show had what is called a show Bible, where they actually talk about the backstory of the world. Scooby-Doo, there's no backstory. Do you know anything about any of the mystery crew? No. They just get together, they solve mysteries, they probably smoke weed in the van, and eat Scooby snacks.
Okay, but yes, technically we do know stuff about the mystery crew, but that is only because of Incorporated. Yes.
But I mean, at that time, these characters didn't have backstories.
There wasn't full blown world building. Yeah.
Whereas with Thundar, they actually came up with a backstory. The idea was that when the world exploded in 1994, the only people who know anything about the modern technology or the ancient technology are the wizards, and so they control everything because they control all the old technology. So basically, Thundar, for the most part, lived in the Stone Age, but if you knew how to fly a helicopter or knew how to, control a computer, you were a wizard. And so Ariel was actually depending upon which version you read, she was either the stepdaughter or the niece of a powerful wizard, and she broke Thundar out of slavery because the wizard was able to control people because he knew how to use the old technology. And so she broke him out, and then he ended up being a very, kind of like the chosen one who could use the sun sword. I know.
How many wizards were there?
A lot.
Okay.
It wasn't just Gemini, the one that we saw in those couple episodes.
I was just concerned that you were going to say there's 3, and I could go, great.
No.
Bezos, Musk, and Branson. So now are going to have our 3 tech people who rule everything. And
well, that's kind of where we're headed. But this is something that no other cartoons had. There was no backstory to Space Ghost. There was no backstory to any of these things. But Thundar did have a backstory, and it never got around to being able to show it because the show was canceled. But it was there, and they wanted to sprinkle it into episodes, but it just never happened.
It was also It was also interesting, like I mentioned before, that they would sometimes kind of remind you in a almost subtle way, but not really, that that this was basically an apocalypse. Everyone, a lot of people died
yeah.
and the world basically ended until it was eventually reborn 3,000 years later. So it definitely does add a little bit of mystery and darkness to the show.
Yeah.
It's oh, this is
everyone's dead.
Everyone's dead.
Yeah.
So I guess an important question to ask you then.
Okay.
Is during your freshman year of college, how did you survive the apocalypse in 1994? And what animal did you travel with? And who was the busty woman that you were disregarding the entire time? Because it wasn't me. I was in 6th grade.
Boy, I forgot that was your age gap.
Yeah.
7 years.
It's not pretty.
It's not fun to know.
I don't have an answer for that.
I'm sure you don't.
Okay.
It's okay.
So I guess the question would be, as this was my nostalgia trip, do I have any interest in watching the show again? I actually kind of do, but only for the nostalgia.
Well, aspects. Because you have something to revisit within it.
Yes. And there are a few, I remembered the characters. Obviously, I loved Ookla as a 5-year-old. I was all over Ookla. Oh. I thought he was the coolest.
Right.
And Thundar, even though he's bombastic and kind of dim, he wasn't really that interesting to me. But
no,
Ookla
but he was your
coolest.
Gateway drug to He-Man.
Well, he was everybody's gateway drug to He-Man.
He was great value He-Man.
Yes. Gateway drug? What?
So...
And I can see a lot of Ariel in the types that you would eventually have crushes on.
The animated types?
Just period. Hourglass figure, dark hair.
Yeah. I think that has more to do with Princess Leia, but yes, I see where you're going with that. Anyway, I would like to kind of go back and revisit this, and again, just for nostalgia purposes, and then not necessarily pore over them and study them as though they were a holy text or anything, but just to kind of be oh, that was fun, oh, that's kind of a neat idea, that's something that is unexpected from a cartoon of that era, just to kind of pick out what made it so interesting to me as a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to do it tomorrow. It's just kind of one of those lazy Sunday.
Put it on in the backgroround, do a puzzle, do something else.
Exactly. It's not something I'm going to focus on and, be my primary thing that week.
I could definitely see, like, Thundar being, like, I don't know if you were into D&D around the time you first watched it.
Not at that
time.
But
I definitely saw that it was, like, almost, like, there was a little bit of him in that, because, I mean, there is you can play a barbarian.
Sure.
You can definitely...
Well, even D&D and Thundar are both influenced by Conan the Barbarian from 1932.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking decades of time before that.
But it was still, like, it was kind of your way, like, one of the many things that led you to D&D.
For sure.
Things like, interests like that.
Absolutely.
Which then you passed down to me, and now I'm...
Yep. But yeah, I mean, I think it was very influential for me as a young person, and I would definitely be interested in going back and kind of checking it out and seeing why it was so fascinating to me at 5. But I understand you guys have no connection to it whatsoever.
Well, and even in doing that, you may find that your connection to it while you were 5 years old was on.
Well, and that's a big part of it.
it was the Little Caesars of television. It's on.
So I might as well be watching it.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's nearby.
Now, I like you said earlier, reboot. I would totally be down for a reboot. They're just rebooting He-Man right now. I haven't watched it yet, but I would be totally down for a Thundar reboot. And I think you could do it really well with today's mentality.
See, I'd rather see a
C-Lab 2021.
A C-Lab-esque, yes.
And I understand that.
A tongue-in-cheek, self-aware.
Yeah. Well, they kind of
animated
did that.
reboot.
What was that show?
You talking about the Heroes?
No. Son of Zorn. So yeah, I mean, they kind of already did your C-Lab 2021 of Thundar the Barbarian with Son of Zorn.
The thing about it is, like, I could definitely see it. Definitely see I feel like it would be an actual good reboot of Thundar.
I think it would be too.
Because, I mean, honestly, that does depend on what you see as a good reboot or not. Because,
I mean, okay, look at the setting.
Yeah.
The setting would be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the idea of the technology being in control of the people who don't have the technology. Just like Mom was saying earlier.
We're heading down that road.
That's kind of where we are. So I think it could definitely be not only just more updated as far as representation, but I think it also might have a pretty decent, interesting theme and moral foundation there to tell a good story that is still reflective today.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of people who, like, at least on the internet and everything, who will say, like, all reboots are bad. Well, no, that's not always the case. There are a few good ones and a few bad ones. There's always going to be something that just doesn't sit right with people who did grow up, but who did grow up with that series that was rebooted.
Right.
But I feel like with Thundar, like, there is definitely a lot you could do there. It's just because the show is canceled, they couldn't tell that story that they wanted to tell. So I feel like it would be really fun to find a Thundar reboot of basically something that relates more to the newer generation, but still has that feeling of, like, it's a world of it's a post-apocalyptic world, and you're able to use that to a lot of your advantage.
I think so too.
From what I've seen in different cartoons with that, where it's the end of the world and this is the aftermath, like,
again, Adventure Time,
and also Kipo in the Wonder Beasts.
Yeah, right.
Which we haven't. We need to add that to
we will.
And that, like, you can use that to your advantage of, like, showing off why there's weird, like, creatures in your show, or, like, why there is, like, or
they could have built the world if they had more time to do so.
If they did.
Right. All right. Well, I think we've
beat this horse to its death.
I think we've talked about all we can really with Thundar for only 21 episodes from 40 some odd years ago.
It's not 40 years ago yet. Oh, it is.
It is.
It's
actually.
80.
Yeah,
I keep thinking 83.
No.
It's 80.
Yeah, it's a little bit over 40.
I'm gonna let my joke slide since I've given you a few today.
So I guess that's it for now.
Yeah. We'll do the next one.
Yeah, we don't know what we're going to do next. It'll be Andrea's choice. We're going to kind of go in sequential order here with me, Andrea, then Harper. So we'll figure out something for next time.
Okay. I'm a potty.
All right.
Thanks for the info.
It's that 40-year-old bladder. Can't hold it anymore.
I forgot my depends.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Generation Toon. Be sure to subscribe today so you can join us as we discuss our favorite cartoons from the last 40 years. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram, both at SMX Audio, where we're available to talk tunes anytime. This has been your host, Rob Lamley, for the Space Monkey X Audio Workshop. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you all next time.